Right, as well, welcome to this webinar on what's new in PhpStorm 8. I've checked my calendar and I think even the time may actually be correct. It's been exactly 3 weeks ago that PhpStorm 8 was released. It's been a long EAP and a lot of new features have been added. A lot of new improvements to existing features have been made. So let's see what's new in terms of PHP development, web development, the framework support that has been improved, and what we can do with development on remote environments like Vagrant, for example. So let's start with the obvious, and let's start with what's new in PHP language support. So you may have noticed that I think a couple of days before or days after PhpStorm 8, PHP 5.6 was released, and of course PhpStorm 8 must have support for that. So the project I have here contains some of the PHP 5.6 features, such as variadic functions, which you can see here, where I'm basically doing something similar to saying that my parameters should be my get arguments of my current function. So it's basically a shorthand syntax and a more concise and easier to debug syntax for that. There's features like expressions in constants like I have here, so I can actually do a multiplication in my constants declaration. There's things like use constant and use function. So instead of prefixing the function with the entire namespace or using the entire namespace, I can simply import one function or one constant into my namespaces. There are things like this thing is one I find really cool in PHP 5.6. This debug info methods, where if you're using var dump, for example, on your code, what will happen is by default it will dump everything that is visible from the class that you've created. Now in this case I have a credit card class and I don't want to var dump the credit card number, so what I can do is overwrite the debug info magic method and simply return whatever I want to return, not everything that's in there. Now you may have noticed in my files here that PhpStorm detected that I'm not using the PHP 5.6 language level. So it's not supported in the current language level I have, so I can use the quick fix and switch to PHP 5.6 language level. So that's been done, and as you can see, we now no longer have any of the inspections we had previously. Everything is fine and everything should be running normal. So PHP 5.6 supports. Now let's open another project, and I'm going to warn you, I have a lot of projects that I will be opening during this webinar, so I will be switching quite a lot. I have a WordPress plugin that I've been developing. So if you go to the blog we have for PhpStorm, that's actually on the same WordPress instance like our .NET blog, our TeamCity blog, and so forth. It's basically a WordPress blog network. And what we want to do is sort of make a plugin that allows us to show links between all the different blogs. So for example, if we do a blog post in the PhpStorm blog on how you can do continuous integration, we may want to show a link of that on the TeamCity blog and so forth. So this is that plugin. Now this plugin is I basically tried to use classes and namespaces and so forth on this WordPress project. So as you can see, I have a folder called Network Marketing, which contains the real plugin functionality of this plugin, and a WordPress folder, which contains some things that we may want to be reusing in future plugins that we develop here at JetBrains. So what you typically want to do is enable PSR0 standards. So the PSR0 auto-loading standards basically says that everything under this WordPress folder should be in a namespace WordPress. Everything under the controllers folder here should be in a namespace controllers and so forth. Now PhpStorm supports that, and we can have it detect that from the code menu and saying detect PSR0 namespace roots. Now, you may have noticed, if I scroll to the top here, that everything is also prefixed with a JetBrains namespace. So we're basically not complying to PSR0 here, and we may want to comply to PSR4 instead, which is basically saying that you can define the root of the namespace with a folder, and from that folder, everything underneath should match what we have in here. So everything under controllers here should be in the JetBrains Network Marketing Controllers namespace, and as you can see, that's something I'm doing here. Now we want to enforce that in PhpStorm and have PhpStorm tell us if we are not doing that and if we are creating a class we want PhpStorm to automatically populate the correct namespace there. So let's go to the settings, go to directories here. And what we can do under the includes folder here is set this as a source root. And what we can do then is click the small p icon here and say that this is actually the root of the JetBrains namespace. Now, I can do it at this level, or I could do it at this level as well, where I can say that this folder contains the JetBrains Network Marketing namespace. That should be in capital. And that this folder contains the JetBrains WordPress namespace. So let's do that and save. And once we've done that, PhpStorm will automatically populate the correct namespace for us when we create a new class. So for example, if we create a new PHP class here, we will see that everything I do under this WordPress folder will get the JetBrains WordPress folder to satisfy the PSR4 standard there. Now, not only that, let's go in here and let's say that this is not WordPress, but Drupal, for example. If we save this, PhpStorm will tell us with an inspection that we are violating the PSR0 and PSR4 project structure, and that we should probably fix this and make this WordPress again, which is quite interesting and quite useful to use. All right, there's a couple of other things in terms of language features. So you may have been writing PHP code, and in that PHP code, and I'm just going to write it somewhere in this function, you may have done something like this, where you say HTML equals, this is an unordered list, and then you do a for each. Let's do a for, or whatever you do a for each, and in that for each, what you are doing is appending list items to that HTML fragment so we can return it to the user once we are done. Now, you may have noticed while I was typing that this list item tag has been completed. What PhpStorm did is it recognized this string literal as an HTML fragment. So even though I'm writing PHP code in here, PhpStorm actually treats this string as a separate HTML editor. So for example, if I want to use things like this, like generating the lorem ipsum and so on, I can use those things in there because this is a full-fledged HTML editor there. I can rename my tag, I can close the tags, and so forth. Now, another interesting thing is, imagine I want to output the view in here and say that I want to concatenate this view parameter in there. What will happen is this is still recognized as an HTML fragment. And what I can do is open the intentions here, say that I want to should do it here. Say that I want to, I should turn off presentation assistance. Say that I want to edit the HTML fragments. What you will see is that a new editor window opens, which is a full HTML editor, and everything I do in there will be automatically added into the original string that I had in my PHP code. So say I want to generate an hyperlink to my controller.php, for example, and say this is test. This will happen. So language injections have been improved, and you now have a full editor, not only when you edit the HTML fragment, but also when you just edit the string. All the HTML features, all the HTML editor features will be available in there. Now, not only in there, I also have a repository which returns some data from my code. In that repository, I have a function which is get all posts. So this will fetch all the posts from my WordPress database. Now, the way WordPress works is that whenever you want to make use of one of the tables in there, you should be using this WPDB variable to get a correct reference to the correct table. Reason for that is all the tables are prefixed with something like WP or whatever, if you're running a network, for example, and this variable will make that the correct variable and provide the correct table name to our code. And what I can do is actually edit that fragment and work with my query. Now, you may notice and you may know that PhpStorm also supports databases. Now, I cannot run this query directly against my database, right? Well, what will happen is PhpStorm recognizes that this is actually referring to my posts table. And what I can do next is simply run the query in console, provide a parameter, which was also auto-detected, and then run my query against my database, and I get my data back. So language injections, not all language injections and not all queries will provide the support converting this variable into this table name, but from now on, all the plugins have the functionality to do this, and the WordPress plugin is one of the first plugins that's actually providing this feature and providing that support. Now, since I'm working with WordPress, let's quickly move from PHP language support into the WordPress support we have in PhpStorm 8. Now, you may have noticed this is a WordPress project, and this is actually a project that I'm currently working on, and it's already been configured to work with WordPress. So what I've done is I copied this entire folder to another folder on my system, and I've removed all the configuration there so that I can show you what I'm about to show you now. So let's open that folder, which is called Network Marketing 2, quite original. Let's open it in this window, and as you may see, PhpStorm asks us if we want to configure WordPress support. So it recognizes this is a WordPress plugin, and I can enable WordPress support. So if we click that, we have to provide a path to a WordPress directory. Reason for that is PhpStorm should be able to parse all the different filters and actions and hooks and so forth that are available in WordPress as a framework. So let's specify WordPress 3.8.1 there. It's not the latest one, but it doesn't really matter in this case because I want the plugin to be available for this WordPress version. Let's click OK. And yeah, we get some more questions. So first thing PhpStorm asks is, do we want to add WordPress to the PHP include paths? Let's do that. Let's fix the include paths. And maybe let's also at once set the interpreter so we can actually run our code. Okay. Another one of the balloons that was shown was, do we want to use the WordPress code style? Now I clicked on the balloons and the balloons disappeared, but from the event log here I can still open the messages that were shown. So PhpStorm asks us if we want to use the WordPress code style. So let's do that, and let's set the WordPress code style. And what it does is it changes the code style that's in use in our current project to the WordPress code style. Now I'm going to cancel that because I don't want all the rest of my demos to follow this code style, but do know that you can simply click fix it and PhpStorm will change all that for us. All right, now let's open a file and let's open our bootstrapper. So what I've done in this plugin is basically create a bootstrapper which sort of fires the framework that I've been building for building WordPress plugins, and then bootstraps everything. So what I'm about to do is add an action, and the way WordPress works is you can subscribe to actions or to hooks and basically register something should be done at a specific point in the timeline of the lifecycle of the WordPress page. So let's add an action, and let's say that this action should subscribe to init. Now all the things you see here in the completion dialog are hooks and actions that we can subscribe to in WordPress. So you get completion for that, and let's say I want to subscribe to init and subscribe my my own init function to that, and you see we also have completion on that one. By the way, if I control click on that function, I will jump to that function and can immediately see what's going on in there. Now it's not really useful because the function is right on top of that, but if I would move this somewhere to the top of my page and I would click there, then it's quite useful to jump back and forth between those things. Now this auto-completion also works for filters, so if we want to add a filter, we can also make use of all the different filters that are available in WordPress as well. Now you may have noticed in the left-hand gutter here, this icon appeared. So what happens is that we can see where this action is defined. So we are referring init as an action. Well, if we click this icon, we can go to the invocation of this hook, of this action hook in WordPress to see what's going on there, why it is called, and where it is called. So let's go there, and we can see that this action is fired from from this file in WordPress settings file. All right, pretty cool, no? You may have seen, or you may have been using Composer or something like that from the command line tools, which you can open using the keyboard shortcuts. An interesting thing is that WordPress also has a command line tool available. The only thing we have to do is install the command line tool. So let's do that using Composer. Let's add a dependency. Let's say that we want to store Composer there. Let's add a dependency on the WordPress command line tools. Install the WordPress command line tools. Shouldn't take too long. It's basically just a download from packages and adding all these things to the project I have here. And if everything goes well, it should be in cache, so it shouldn't actually take that long. All right, the next thing we can do is go to the settings. Let's go to the settings, go to command line tools, and we can add a new command line tool there. So you may know from PhpStorm 7 that there was support for Composer. If you were doing Drupal, there's support for Drush. In PhpStorm 8, a number of tools have been added, among which the WordPress command line interface. And the only thing we have to do if it's installed into our project is pick this tool, click OK, and PhpStorm allows us to specify where this command line tool is stored. Now I should know where this is, somewhere under my projects, samples, no, not under samples, under this plugin folder, under vendor somewhere, WordPress clients. There we are. Click OK, and PhpStorm will recognize all the different commands that are in there. So it found 201 commands. And what I can now do is make use of the WordPress client in here, the WordPress command line tool, and invoke all the commands that are provided by this tool, including completion on all these things. So I may not be able to remember that there's a WP core install function. What I can do is simply use it from this list and then complete and invoke from there. So quite interesting, I think. WordPress is not the only framework that has received some love in PhpStorm 8. There's also a number of things that have been happening around Symfony. Now, an interesting thing is what I'm about to show you is based on an open source plugin. So the Symfony framework, the plugin that supports Symfony framework, has been written by someone in the community called Daniel Espendiller. Thank you for doing this. It's basically a wonderful plugin if you are working with Symfony framework. So let's open this project. And again, this Symfony 2 plugin, which I have to install, recognizes that this is a Symfony 2 application, and I can go to my project settings and then enable the plugin for this project. Now, one thing with the Symfony 2 plugin is when we enable the plugin for this project, we actually have to restart our PhpStorm IDE just once. Reason for that is that the plugin does quite a lot of things in the background, and it only is allowed to start whenever the IDE starts. So let's restart our IDE and let's see what this Symfony 2 plugin can do for us. So that's loading the project again. All right, there we are. So there's a number of things this plugin adds, and really a number of things is quite the understatement. It's actually almost an IDE in such. This plugin does a lot of things, among which referencing between views and controllers and so on. So for example, I have my welcome controller here with an index action. As you can see, there's this twig icon in the left-hand gutter. If I click that, I will go to the twig template there. If I want to go back to my to where this block is defined, for example, I can click here and navigate to the place where this block is defined in the parent layout of this twig template. So a lot of things in terms of navigating back and forth between controllers and views and so forth. Now, another interesting thing is that in here, this is actually not a syntax that will be used in our source code, but it's a shorthand syntax for rendering this view. And the plugin also makes it this short, concise syntax, so it's easier to read. But if we click this, we will see the actual original syntax there, and we can navigate to the view as well. There's a couple of other things in there. So for example, if we want to make use of assets in our Twig templates, what will happen is that the plugin knows about all the assets that we have in our project. Another interesting thing is, for example, if we wanted to translate this word congratulations, we can simply use the context menu, extract translation, and this will actually create a translation in a translation file for us. Same thing with services. So the way Symfony works is it works with dependency injection. And if we go to our services.xml, we will get completion for all the classes that we have as well. So the plugin adds functionality around building this type of file. So what I can do is invoke completion, and we will basically get all the classes that we have there. It will complete arguments. It knows about other services that have been defined. So if you want to pass in one service into another one, the plugin will also make that possible. So a lot of things in terms of Symfony 2 development there. All right, I've told you that Symfony and WordPress are not the only frameworks that had some love in PhpStorm 8. So let's move to another framework, and let's move to Drupal this time. So if everything is well, I should have the aggregator entry here. The aggregator is a Drupal module, and I'm just going to open that project. Again, same thing like with Drupal and so forth, with WordPress and Symfony. PhpStorm asks us if we want to enable Drupal support. So let's enable it. We can specify where we have a full-fledged Drupal installation, which is needed again to provide all the code completion and hook support and so on. So let's click OK. Let's pick the version, and we support version 6, 7, and 8. In this case, we are on an alpha version of 8. Let's click OK, and that should be it. Again, we can set Drupal style formatting, so no skip the WordPress formatting and go into Drupal in this case. And we can start working on our Drupal module. So in the module, we can do a lot of things. We can, for example, write a new hook implementation and say that we want to write a function called aggregator underscore user cancel. Whenever that happens, we can simply complete that, and PhpStorm will make sure all the parameters, all the PHP doc blocks and so forth are added to our code. Another interesting thing is that we also get this cutter support where we can click to where this hook is actually either defined or invoked. So we can go there and we can see this is the place where user cancel is invoked inside the Drupal core, or in the user module in this case. Now, an interesting thing is Drupal 8 is actually built on top of some of the Symfony framework components. So if you have the Symfony framework plugin installed into PhpStorm, we can also enable it on this Drupal module. So let's do that. And again, we have to restart our PhpStorm for that. But this will provide a lot of additional functionality on top of what PhpStorm does for Drupal as such. So PhpStorm by default gives you hook completion. It will provide navigation from hooks to hook invocations and so forth. But by installing the Symfony 2 plugin, and there's actually also a Symfony 2 bridge plugin that you will have to install, you get a number of additional functionalities, like, for example, completion on translations. So if I use the T function in Drupal, we will get completion on all the translations that are already available in our project, and we are able to use those. Same thing, for example, in the info file of our module, we will get completion on all the different Drupal-specific keys that should be available in there. There's a bunch of additional things in there, but you get the picture. By adding this plugin, you get the added benefit of having support for and Drupal and Symfony 2 in PhpStorm. And again, if you want to make use of Drush, the command line tool for Drupal, you can also make use of that one in the IDE. All right, we had Drupal, we had WordPress, we had Symfony. Let's see if there's something else. And yes, there is something else. We should have support for Blades. If you're building Laravel applications, we now have Blade syntax support. So as you can see here, we already have some syntax highlighting. and we can add some directives in there. So for example, if we want to write another for each, we can simply start there, and we will have completion for all the syntax elements that are available in our blade syntax. Now, if you want to, for example, display a variable somewhere in that loop, what PhpStorm will do is provide code completion based on the context we are in. So if in this case we say this should not be M but MSG, we will get completion for MSG instead. So it knows about the syntax and it knows about what we are trying to do in there. There's things like navigation as well. So if we go to our index.blade, for example, you will see that we get navigation for basically everything that's in our blade template hierarchy. So if we control click on default, we will go to our default blade. If we control click on layouts, we will move to the layouts folder where default.blade.php is situated. We can navigate to site as well. So by splitting this based on the dots, we can navigate back and forth in our project tool window or directly to a specific view. All right. There should also be a number of inspections. So for example, we are defining a section styles here, which by the way provides collapsing and expanding of that section as well. If for some reason we forget to write this stop directive, which basically says the templating engine that this section ends there, we can immediately see that this section is highlighted and that we are missing a stop directive. So the section directive is not closed, and the only way to have that thing go away is by adding the stop directive, and we will see that now the inspection is also satisfied. All right, WordPress, Drupal, Laravel, Symfony, what else would be there? Let's have a look at something else. I feel like Steve Jobs. It's like, oh, and one more thing. We now have Behat support. So let's open a Behat project. And for those of you who don't know Behat, Behat is a behavior-driven development framework. So we have test-driven development where we write our unit tests first, and then write a code that actually satisfies everything that we specified inside our PHP unit tests. Well, Behat is sort of similar, except that the syntax for writing the tests is Gherkin. So it allows us to really describe how we want this feature to work. And as you can see in here, we are defining that the feature parameters has a background. So that's basically our setup, and several test scenarios. So for example, when I run Behat no colors, then we should get this as the output, for example. So there's a number of scenarios that we can define in what's pretty much a very nice syntax. Now PhpStorm supports this syntax, and for example, we can use all the different triggers and so forth that we have, and features that we have in there. Another nice thing is that we can run these things. So for example, if we want to run our parameters feature, we can simply right-click, say that we want to run our parameters.feature, and we will get pretty much the same thing like with PHP unit. We will be running our Behat tests in this case. So all our scenarios will be run, and we can see what passed and what did not pass. Now, one more thing, again, there we are. Imagine I wanted to write a different scenario. And let's say I want to write a scenario which says that, I'm in trouble there, which says that when, let's say, pigs can fly, then we should be doing something. As you can see, PhpStorm recognized that this pigs can fly step hasn't been defined yet. So what we can do is simply Alt-Enter and use the intention to create a step definition. And we can create that step definition in either a new file or an existing file, but let's create a new file. Let's say this is the pigs context. There we are. This will generate the entire class in which we can define what this pigs can fly thing should do in our context. So we can start writing it in here. So I think that's pretty useful. We can run our tests, we can write our tests, and we have a lot of support from the editor and the IDE in making that as a simple task, or at least a less cumbersome task than writing everything manually. All right. So that's about it for all the different frameworks we have, but there's of course a lot of other things in PhpStorm as well. So let's open yet again a new project. And in this case, I'm going to open my Vagrant project. Now, the reason for that is I know a lot of people are actually developing their code on a Vagrant machine. So for those of you who don't know Vagrant, Vagrant is basically a way of describing a virtual machine using code and recreating the exact same virtual machine again and again and again. So you can potentially even bring that VM configuration to a production or staging environment. Now, the fun thing about that is we have seen a lot of people actually write their code inside PhpStorm, but they want to run everything they have in their project on this Vagrant machine or another remote machine. So previously, it was quite cumbersome to set up a way of, for example, running your scripts on the remote machine, running unit tests on the remote machine, and so forth. So let's see how we can do this now. So let's go to the settings. Let's go to PHP. And as you can see, we are currently using the PHP 5.6 interpreter, which is installed on my local machine. Now, if we wanted to add a new interpreter that lives on a machine somewhere else, we can say that we want to add a remote interpreter and provide SSH credentials, reuse a deployment configuration, for example, or if we are running Vagrant, we can simply click Vagrant here, and this will actually make a connection to the Vagrant machine and make sure that everything is set up correctly. So we only have to click OK, and we will have our remote PHP interpreter configured. So let's wait for it to recognize all the paths and see where everything is located on the machine. Shouldn't take too long. That's what they always say, shouldn't take too long, right? We can see that PhpStorm recognized this as PHP version 5.4, and it's even named it Remote PHP 5.4 on my Vagrant machine. We have Xdebug there, and it's this exact version of PHP running in this Vagrant machine. Next thing we can do is click OK. Pick our remote interpreter here, click OK again, and everything that we do will now run on our Vagrant box. So if we right-click our index.php file and say run script, we will actually see a tool window will be opened. This takes a little bit longer because it has to set up an SSH connection. But as we can see from this tool window, the script now has actually been run on my Vagrant machine. So it's really easy. You just have to configure a remote interpreter and everything will run on our Vagrant box. Now, of course, just running scripts is not the only thing we will be doing. So we also want to be running PHP unit tests, for example. Well, we can go to the settings, go to PHP unit there, and say that we now also have a PHP unit configuration that uses a remote interpreter. Click OK, and the only thing we have to do is specify where we want to load PHP unit from. Now, the main difference between my local PHP unit configuration and the remote PHP unit configuration is that for this configuration, we actually have to specify where our autoloader, for example, if we are using Composer, lives on the virtual machine instead of on my local machine, because this will be run on the virtual machine, and the virtual machine, of course, has to know where this file lives and what the directory structure is for running this thing. So let's click OK, and let's maybe run some unit tests. So let's run our unit tests. And again, this takes a little bit longer because it has to set up an SSH connection. But if everything goes well, let's wait for it a little bit longer. If everything goes well, we should be running our tests on the Vagrant box. So as you can see from the log from PHP unit here, we are actually running using this remote interpreter on our Vagrant machine. So that's pretty nice and nifty, to be honest. Now, you may think that everything has been set up, right? Well, most projects are using Composer nowadays as well. And the problem with Composer, or the good thing about Composer, depending on how you look at it, is that to be able to run, it has to have a PHP interpreter installed. Now, PhpStorm works in such a way that whatever PHP interpreter we define will be used by all the PHP tools that are built into PhpStorm. Problem with that is if we want to use Composer, Composer will also try using this remote PHP interpreter, which of course will not really work. The good thing is for Composer, we can also specify that instead of the default project interpreter, we want to be using a different one, for example, PHP 5.6. Click OK, and we can now also use Composer. And the interesting thing about this setup is that we can now run whatever we are developing on our Vagrant box, see if everything works in the environments that we plan to deploy our application on, but still develop in PhpStorm on our local machine, which is quite nice. Again, I've just shown you PHP unit, but if you're using Behat, for example, to do behavior-driven development tests, that will also work in a similar fashion. All right, let's switch to something else, because PHP and PhpStorm are not only about backend PHP development, there's also front-end. So I can imagine a number of people will be using AngularJS. Well, PhpStorm comes with AngularJS support. Now, before we dive into what this plugin does, I quickly want to mention that PhpStorm basically provides all the functionality that's available in WebStorm as well. The only thing you have to do to enable it is go to the settings, go to plugins under the IDE settings, and install JetBrains plugin. So by default, AngularJS, for example, NodeJS will not be installed into PhpStorm, but you can simply enable these features by installing the plugin from this JetBrains plugin repository. All right, so Angular. What I have here is a simple to-do application and an app controller in which I have a to-do controller which does a number of things. And what I've done is built a simple to-do application. So what PhpStorm does is it will provide completion for all the Angular directives. So I can see that I can provide the class here, I can add a click directive and so forth. Not only that, not only all the standard directives, I can also define my own directives. So for example, I've created a very simple, basically stupid autocomplete directive, which is called ng autocomplete. Well, by adding that one, I can now also use my ng autocomplete. And I've actually done that here. I can add ng autocomplete as a directive to what I'm doing here. Now, again, Control-click will navigate to where this directive is defined. Same thing if we click on model properties or functions, for example. If we click on Control-click on Add To Do, we will quickly go to our controller's Add To Do function. Same thing with remaining, same thing with whatever we are doing in here. So Archive To Do, for example, will also jump there. So AngularJS support, quite useful and quite powerful. All right, not only Angular, there's also support for Bower. So let's open the Bower demo. Imagine we wanted to install Twitter Bootstrap or an Angular framework into this application. Well, the Bower Package Manager supports doing that by simply going to the settings, go into the Bower node in here, and then adding dependencies. So it will show you all the dependencies that have already been installed. So actually this application already contains Bootstrap. But what we can do is simply add one and say that we want to search for Bootstrap Angular or something like that. I've been too quick, I guess, or my internet connectivity died on this machine. But we should be able to quickly search that. Not only search, also as you can see here, the latest version is version 3.2 and I'm on 3.1. Well, we can update from here as well. Simply click the button and PhpStorm will run Bower to update or upgrade this Bower module. In case you are doing Node.js, Node.js basically has a similar package manager available. So if you install the Node.js plugin, you will also see that we can work with the packages in much the same way. We can upgrade our NPM packages, we can add new packages and so on. So Bower and Node.js, pretty interesting. All right, web developers often are using this thing called Grunt as well. So if you know this, that's good for you. We will dive immediately into what it does. But if you don't know this, this is basically a JavaScript thing. So it's a build runner that allows you to define tasks which can be run, which can be chained, and which can do things to your project. They can do things like simply echoing hello world like I'm doing in this file, but they can do things like minimizing CSS, stripping all the white space out of a JavaScript file, doing bundling, doing whatever you want them to do, and we can run those. So if you've been using Thing on the PHP side, you may recognize that Grunt actually works pretty similar. So if we do search everywhere and search for Grunt, we will get a new tool window that actually recognizes our Grunt file, in which we can see all the different tasks that we have defined. So let's say we want to run hello grunt. Well, we can simply click the button here and this will run hello grunt. So this hello grunt task here will be run. We can also run our default alias, which will run everything, and we can see the results in this window here. There's a couple of things that we can do from the toolbar, so we can enable word wrapping and so on. But also, if we wanted to use the force option for running grunt or the verbose option for running grunt, we can enable those there. And if we run that, we will see more output because we've enabled the verbose output for grunt there. All right, more front ends. Let's switch the project again and let's go to the Spy.js demo. Spy.js is an interesting thing in that it is a JavaScript debugger which also works in the past. That's a very strange concept, but I will show you in a minute what that means. If we create a new configuration like this, run Spy.js, and we say that we want to run our application using Spy.js, what we can do is simply press the button there, run our sample in the browser. Let's try that one more time. Let's run our Spy.js again. All right, let's refresh our browser. And we can now see that Spy.js is active in this window. And what we can see in PhpStorm is all the events that happened in the page while it was executing. Now the page has already been executed, but we can still see which events have been fired, which functions they they executed, so we can see the entire stack trace of what happens, as well as, for example, the arguments that were passed into this hello world function and what the return value was. So that's pretty amazing because we sort of get debugging, tracing, and profiling in something that happened in the past using Spy.js. And I can even double click on this function and navigate to the function, see which lines of code have been executed, what was in this name parameter, and so forth. Now, this is a big gotcha because all this was already available in PhpStorm 7. Now, the reason I wanted to show you this is because you would know that this exists for front-end as well as what we are going to see now for back-end. So I also have a Node.js application using the Express framework, which is basically a model view controller framework that you can use for building Node.js. What I've done is also created a Spy.js configuration for this application. Basically saying that I want to run my www JavaScript file using Node.js enabled. So let's run our application with Spy.js. Once we do that, we will see that we now have our script listening. So our server has been started. We can see the event has been fired on Node.js, which says that I'm listening for incoming connections and so forth. And whatever we do in the browser, I think it runs on port 3000. Whatever we do there will be reflected in Spy.js as well. So if we switch back to PhpStorm, we will see that the Node.js, so the server-side code, actually triggered all these events, and we can see whatever happened in there, all the different modules and so forth. Now, an interesting thing there is that we can also filter. So in here, we can see that Express is doing quite a lot of things in the code we have here. Now imagine we only are interested in, say, this parse URL module. What we can do is say, for Express, mute this node module, and from the moment we click OK here, all future requests will not be tracking the Express module, but they will still be tracking the other modules. So we can filter the data that we are interested in order to be more concise and have a more targeted data collection happening in there. All right, so that's quite a number of things. There's, of course, a number of other things which are in the IDE themselves. So we've seen PHP 5.6 support, we've seen framework support, we've seen language injections, front-end stuff, and so forth. Well, there's one more thing, which is things like multiple selections. For example, if we have this markdown file here, and imagine we want to convert this code into a PHP array. What we can do is simply press hold the Alt key and then click wherever you want the cursor to appear. And as you can see, we now have 4 cursors. This may blow your mind, may not blow your mind, but I think this is pretty cool. So let's add a quote there. Let's move to the end, add a quote there, add a comma at the end, then press delete, then go to start again, and then say this is an array of strings. That was pretty easy to create an array that we can use in PHP. Not only in Markdown, not only in PHP, we can do similar things in our code. So for example, if we are in this function and we wanted to replace this value with something else, well, what we can do is select that word, press the shortcut a couple of times, which is Alt-J, on Windows at least. This will select every occurrence of the word value in there, and we can change this into, say, val instead of value. Now, of course, this is something that I also could have done using a rename refactoring, but just to show you that it can select multiple words as at once, or multiple occurrences of a word at once, and that we can not only just, well, that it's more than just alt-clicking and creating the cursors manually. So we can also select next occurrences of a specific word. Then something that I've grown tired of hearing on Twitter, for example, is that PhpStorm does not allow me to create temporary files that I can just do some work in without adding them to the project. That is correct. That was not in PhpStorm 7, at least if you didn't install the Scratch plugin. But with PhpStorm 8, we now have the Scratch plugin bundled. So if we want to create a new Scratch, and let's do that, we can say that we want to create a Scratch in, say, PHP. We can do some writing in there and add some code. Code goes here. And this is now a Scratch. This is saved. I can move to my files and so forth, but this Scratch is not part of my project. It will only become part of the project when I say save as, and then I can actually save it into my my project. So if I do a save as, this will actually copy this Scratch into our actual project. So let's say this becomes index.php, and our Scratch is now an index.php file. So we can save it, but we don't have to. We can have multiple Scratches as well. So from the Tools menu here, we can create multiple Scratches, or we can view all the different Scratches that are available. So in this case, I no longer have Scratches open, but if I would have a number of temporary files, they would all be shown in this little list there. Another complaint that we've heard quite a lot was, can I use PhpStorm to open just one file without creating a project? Well, yes, you can. So let's open a file from, say, my desktop. I've created a copy of the variadics.php file there. I can simply open that file without having to create a project. I can simply work on this one specific file. And as you can see, it's located just on my system and not in a project structure. Pretty interesting. One more thing I wanted to show you, because a lot of people, when creating documentation and so forth, they want to include code samples, for example. Well, what I can do is copy this code, then open my word processor, do a paste, and as you can see, we now have rich text copy pasting from whatever we have in the IDE towards where we want it to be used. So that's quite interesting as well. And with that, I think we are about through the big changes in PhpStorm 8. There's a bunch of other things. There's a bunch of tutorials available on all the new stuff as well. So, Misha, I think we can move on to some questions.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Maarten, for a great presentation. It's really packed with all the new features and workflows. That's really great. So we are ready to get all the questions in the questions pane as a GoToWebinar, and we already have the first one. That's actually about the screen you already have opened. Is it possible to work with deployment and debugging when you're actually opening opening a single file in the editor?
That's a good question. I haven't tried it yet. So I should try it. I don't think I have a deployment currently configured to give it a go. But in theory, it should be possible to just download a file from a deployment server or from a remote host and then open that single file as well. So I should have, no, I have none configured currently, so sorry. Although yes, I have one. So let's see if we can open one file from there. We cannot. So I guess the answer is no there.
But you can download it, seems to be to the project structure, right?
You can download it and then open it from local. So you can download the file to your local disk and then work with the file from there.
Thank you. And the next question, is it possible to define a keyboard shortcut to open the Open Recent menu, for example, Open Recent projects?
Yes, it is. So if you want to configure your own keyboard shortcuts, you simply go to Settings, then go to Key Map, and then you typically search for the action you want to add a shortcut. So for example, if that's recent, I can say recent files or recent changes. There is actually a shortcut for that. But in case we want to change this shortcut or reopen recent project, for example, let's assign a shortcut to that one. We can simply use the context menu there, add a keyboard shortcut, and then specify the keystrokes we want to use. Now, do be warned, I've tried this a couple of times, and a lot of keyboard shortcuts are actually occupied already by PhpStorm. So, for example, the Control-R, Control-P that I want to assign here is already being used by find and replace, and also by reload page whenever we are in the database tools window. So the question is not, can I do it? Because that's simple. The question is there still a keyboard shortcut that I can actually use?
Thank you. There is a bit of clarification that was actually about file open recent in PhpStorm, but I think okay, I think we will try to elaborate about that just as a follow-up via email. Yeah, so that will be easier to explore what was the original question about that. Thank you. We have a couple of questions about support for some additional frameworks like Joomla and Zen Framework 2. And I would actually answer that from my side that we definitely have a respective requests in the issue tracker, both about Joomla and Zen Framework 2. And as we are supporting most of major frameworks right now, and in fact, Joomla and Zen Framework 2 are supported at some level because it's actually PHP, so the support is quite advanced. And we do think about some additional support for them, but we don't have any specific dates or estimates for those to be implemented. So you just need to go and vote for them in the issue tracker to speed things up. So let's move on to some other question. Just a generic one. Any way to get PhpStorm 8 to load faster on Windows 7?
That's a good question. I don't know about the answer. I haven't seen much performance issues with it, to be honest. It loads quite fast. And it's something that's open all day anyway. But do feel free to send us an email, or we will contact you through email and see if it's a misconfiguration or something.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next question. Just a second. The question about 64 bits distribution of PhpStorm, which is available in a standard distribution right now for Windows. And the question is how actually to use it. Have you had any experience with this one, Maarten?
I actually just ran the installer and it just works. So again, if you have a specific question on that, feel free to reach out and we'll see what we can do over email or have a Skype session.
One more question is about using multiple cursor in Ubuntu, and the question is there any difference to do multiple cursors and selections in Ubuntu? And I guess no, right, Maarten? That should be pretty the same.
It's actually pretty much the same. If you have a different key map, the keyboard shortcut may be different, but in theory, it's basically just using, well, on Windows and Linux, Alt-click, and you will have the multiple cursors, or Alt-J to select every occurrence of the current word that you have underneath the cursor. And if you do want to know about the correct shortcuts, I've shown you how you can create your own shortcuts there, but in here you are also able to search for the actual action. So if we search for Alt-J, for example, we will see that this is add selection for next occurrence. So we can search both based on the keyboard shortcut as well as the action that we want to execute and then see what the keyboard shortcut is.
And the next question is also about multiple selections. Can you do multiple selection across 2 or more files?
Across 2 or more files? No, I don't think it's possible to do that currently.
One more question, which seems to be interesting. Are there any plans to rewrite PhpStorm in other language like C++?
Well, that's a question you can probably answer, Misha.
Yeah, sorry, no. Yeah, because actually the idea behind is that we have a platform that's IntelliJ that's on the market for many years, and that's very stable, and it's written in Java, and a lot of our products are actually built on this platform, and not only our products, because part of the platform is open source. So actually porting that to C++ or any other language would be quite a disaster for us in terms of workload at least, and in terms of compatibility across platforms as well. So we don't have any plans to rewrite PhpStorm on C++ or something like that. And one more question. Is it possible to open the same file in different panels or splits?
Well, let's open this file and split it vertically. And well, yes, it's possible. So we can work in the same file in different splits. Let's add an horizontal one there as well. So we can do it multiple times and work with it like that.
Thank you. And back to multiple selections with the select next function, where their value instances have been selected. Is there a way to skip one? For example, to select the first and the third one?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually don't use it that often to use the selection that way. So I would have to search for that. Do you know, Misha?
No, in fact, no. But we will try to follow up on this one as well. I believe it's not possible right now, but probably there is already a request in issue tracker, so we will check that and follow up via email. And the next question is, will all the functionality discussed today be available in IntelliJ 14? And I think I'll answer this one because yes, it's already available in IntelliJ 14 early access program, or even, they have public preview right now. So the PHP plugin is published, and Blade and other plugins are also updated and pushed to the repository, so you can get it from there. And for stable IntelliJ IDEA 14, of course, plugins will be there as well. So it seems that we are a bit running out of time, and we still have a bit of questions over there. So we will just follow up to everyone we haven't answered in voice or for whom we promised to check out more information. So we'll be doing that today and tomorrow. And I'll just get the screen back to me to show you some valuable information. So let's thank you, Maarten, for a great presentation today. Thanks a lot. And
You're welcome.
yeah, thank you. So yeah, here we go. If you still haven't got any time to download PhpStorm 8, you should do that at jetbrains.com/PhpStorm. There is 8.01 version already available. That's maintenance update, and there is early access program for 8.02 opened, so you can get a nightly build as well. And if you have any feedback, please post it via Twitter to Maarten Balliauw or PhpStorm Twitter handlers. And the recording of the webinar, as I already said, will be available in a few days, and we will post it to youtube.com/jetbrains. And make sure to follow us in Twitter, PhpStorm, and blog at blog.jetbrains.com. And thank you everyone for joining us today. See more screencasts and webinars at our JetBrains TV channel at YouTube. And please make sure to fill in the survey about this webinar right after the webinar is going to be ended, so that we know a bit more information about how to improve them for future. So thanks a lot for joining us, and have a nice day. Develop with pleasure.